My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my family's favoritism turned me into the woman I never knew I could become. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I learned early that in the Martinez household, there were 2 daughters, but only one who truly mattered. The autumn leaves were falling like golden tears outside our Tudor-style home when my parents called us both into the living room. I was 17, my sister Emma was 19, and we were about to have what would become one of the defining moments of my life. Dad sat in his leather recliner, the same one he'd owned since before we were born, while Mom perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands nervously smoothing her floral dress. "Girls, your father and I have been talking," Mom began, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver news that would inevitably favor Emma. "We've made some decisions about your futures." Emma bounced slightly in her chair, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon light streaming through our bay windows. She had that expectant look in her green eyes, the same look she'd worn every Christmas morning since we were children, knowing that the bigger presents under the tree always had her name on them. I sat quietly in the corner chair, the one with the slightly faded upholstery that nobody else ever chose. My dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and I wore a plain sweater and jeans, the same uniform I'd adopted to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention. In our family, attention meant comparison, and comparison always meant coming up short. "Emma," Dad said, leaning forward with a smile that reached his eyes, "we've decided to buy you a car for college, a brand new Honda Accord. We think it'll help you focus on your studies without worrying about transportation." Emma squealed with delight, jumping up to hug both parents. I watched this display of affection from my corner, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest that I'd learned to associate with family meetings. "And Sarah," Mom continued, finally turning to acknowledge my presence, "we've looked into the public transportation options near your community college. The bus route runs right by campus. It's very convenient." The words hit me like ice water. Emma gets a brand new car for the state university, and I get bus directions for community college. The disparity wasn't subtle, but then again, it never was in our house. "But Mom," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, "I got accepted to Northwestern too. My grades are actually higher than Emma's were." Dad's face darkened slightly, that look he got when I dared to speak up about anything. "Sarah, we've been through this. Community college is more practical for you. Besides, Emma has more extracurricular activities on her resume." What he didn't say, but what we all knew, was that Emma's extracurriculars consisted mainly of cheerleading and student government positions she'd won based more on popularity than merit. My robotics team victories and volunteer work at the local animal shelter apparently didn't carry the same weight. "I understand," I said, because that's what I always said. It was easier than fighting, easier than watching the disappointment in their eyes when I pushed back against their decisions. That night, I lay in my small bedroom, listening to Emma on the phone with her friends, excitedly describing the car she'd pick out the next weekend. My room shared a thin wall with hers, so I'd grown accustomed to being an unwilling audience to her life. Through the drywall, I could hear her laughing about how she'd never have to ride the loser cruiser like some people. The November rain drummed against my window as I stared at the Northwestern acceptance letter I kept hidden in my desk drawer. Full academic scholarship, honors program, everything I'd worked towards since freshman year. But apparently, it wasn't enough to matter. That weekend, I watched from our living room window as Dad and Emma drove off to the Honda dealership. Mom was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared Emma's favorite chocolate chip cookies to celebrate. I grabbed my jacket and walked to the bus stop, needing to get away from the house and all its suffocating favoritism. The number 47 bus was nearly empty when I climbed aboard, dropping my quarters into the slot with a metallic clink. I took a seat near the back and watched the Chicago suburbs roll by, each neat house representing families I imagined were nothing like mine. At the downtown library, I spread my homework across a corner table and tried to focus on calculus. But my mind kept wandering to the conversation I'd overheard between my parents the night before, when they thought Emma and I were both asleep. "I just think we need to be realistic about Sarah's potential," Mom had said, her voice carrying through the thin walls of our old house. "Exactly," Dad had replied. "Emma has the personality for success. Sarah's always been more of a behind-the-scenes type. Community college and a practical career path make sense for her. Behind the scenes. That phrase had echoed in my head all night. Was that really how my own parents saw me? As someone destined to fade into the background while Emma claimed center stage? The next Monday at school, I threw myself into my computer programming class with renewed intensity. Mrs. Chen, our instructor, noticed my extra effort immediately. "Sarah, you're working on something beyond the curriculum," she observed, stopping by my workstation during independent study time. "I'm teaching myself app development," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "I figure if I'm going to community college, I should at least learn skills that matter." Mrs. Chen sat down in the chair next to me, her expression thoughtful. "You know, I have a contact at a tech startup downtown. They're looking for interns who can code. Unpaid, but the experience would be invaluable." I looked up from my computer for the first time in an hour. "Really? You think I'd qualify?" "Sarah, you're the most naturally gifted programmer I've taught in 15 years. Your logical thinking and problem-solving abilities are exceptional. Of course you'd qualify." That afternoon, I rode the bus downtown for an interview at NextGen Solutions, a small company developing software for local businesses. The office was in a converted warehouse in the River North District, with exposed brick walls and the kind of creative energy I'd only read about in magazines. Marcus Webb, the founder, was a 30-something entrepreneur who dropped out of college to build his first company. He reviewed my portfolio on a laptop while I sat nervously in a mismatched chair that probably came from a garage sale. "This is impressive work for a high school student," he said, scrolling through my code samples. "Self-taught?" "Mostly, yes. I've been programming since I was 14. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Here's the thing, Sarah. I don't care about your age or your formal education. I care about what you can do. Can you commit to 20 hours a week?" "Absolutely," I replied without hesitation. "Then welcome to NextGen Solutions. You start Monday." Walking out of that warehouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about my future. For the first time, someone was judging me based on my abilities, not comparing me to Emma or measuring me against some predetermined notion of what I should be. At home that evening, I sat at our dining room table, helping Mom set out plates for dinner. Emma was upstairs getting ready for a date, the sound of her hairdryer drowning out the television in the living room where Dad watched the news. "I got an internship at a tech company," I mentioned casually, placing the last fork beside a plate. "That's nice, honey," Mom replied, but her attention was focused on the oven timer. "Emma's going to homecoming with Brad Peterson this weekend. Can you imagine? The Brad Peterson wants to take our daughter to homecoming. Our daughter. Not your sister or Emma. Our daughter. As if I weren't sitting right there, as if I weren't also their daughter who'd just landed a competitive internship. The timer dinged and Mom pulled out a casserole dish, the steam fogging up her glasses. "Oh, I almost forgot. Your father and I are taking Emma car shopping again this Saturday. The first Honda didn't have all the features she wanted." I nodded, because what else was there to do? Emma gets a do-over on her brand new car purchase while I'm celebrating a bus pass and an unpaid internship. The contrast would have been laughable if it weren't so painfully real. Dinner that night followed the usual pattern. Emma dominated the conversation with stories about school, her friends, her plans for the future. My parents hung on every word, asking follow-up questions and offering advice. When I mentioned my internship again, Dad looked up from his meatloaf briefly. "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your studies," he said, before turning back to Emma's story about her chemistry lab partner. After dinner, I retreated to my room and opened my laptop. The NextGen Solutions employee handbook waited in my email, along with a project brief for my first assignment. As I read through the technical specifications, I felt that spark of possibility again. Maybe this was how I'd find my way out of being the family's afterthought. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm of school, internship, and homework. I'd take the bus downtown 3 days a week, spending afternoons in that converted warehouse, learning more about business and technology than any classroom had ever taught me. Marcus turned out to be an incredible mentor, treating me like a full team member rather than just a high school intern. He included me in client meetings, asked for my input on project decisions, and gradually gave me more responsibility. "You have a natural instinct for what users need," he told me one afternoon as we reviewed my latest app mockup. "That's not something you can teach. You either have it or you don't." At home, my new schedule went largely unnoticed. Emma's homecoming preparations consumed everyone's attention, from dress shopping to photo appointments. I'd slip in through the back door after my internship days, grab a sandwich, and head upstairs to work on homework or personal coding projects. The night of homecoming, I sat in my room listening to the chaos downstairs as Emma got ready. Mom was taking pictures, Dad was meeting Brad and his parents, and the whole house buzzed with excitement. I put on my headphones and lost myself in coding, building a small web application just for the satisfaction of solving problems. Around midnight, long after Emma had left for the dance, I was still at my computer when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Emergency client meeting tomorrow morning. Can you join us? Your input would be valuable on this project." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. A Saturday morning client meeting meant missing Emma's second car shopping trip, but it also meant being trusted with something important at work. I texted back, "I'll be there." The next morning, I left the house before anyone else was awake, catching the early bus downtown. The client meeting was with a regional restaurant chain looking to modernize their ordering system. Marcus introduced me as their lead developer on user experience, and I felt a surge of pride at being recognized for my actual contributions. The restaurant executives were initially surprised to see a teenager in the meeting, but as I presented my interface designs and explained the user flow, their expressions shifted from skepticism to genuine interest. "This is exactly what we need," the CEO said, pointing to one of my wireframes. "Simple enough for customers, powerful enough for our staff. How soon can you implement this?" Walking out of that meeting, I realized something fundamental had changed. These business leaders weren't seeing me as somebody's little sister or the family disappointment. They were seeing me as Sarah the developer, Sarah the problem solver, Sarah who could deliver results. When I got home that afternoon, the driveway held a gleaming new Honda Accord with temporary tags. Emma was washing it with Dad, both of them laughing as soap suds flew in all directions. Mom sat on the porch steps, taking pictures of their car washing adventure. "How was your work thing?" Mom asked as I walked up the driveway. "Good," I replied. "We landed a new client, a restaurant chain." "That's nice," she said, but her camera was already focused back on Emma and Dad. I went inside and up to my room, where I opened my laptop and began sketching out the project timeline for the restaurant app. For the next 6 months, this would be my primary focus at Next Gen Solutions, and the success or failure would largely depend on my designs. As autumn turned to winter, my internship evolved into something more substantial. Marcus began paying me for my hours, not much, but enough to start building my own small savings account. More importantly, he started including me in strategic decisions about the company's direction. "I want to bring you on as a full partner once you graduate," he told me one snowy December afternoon. 20% ownership, equal say in major decisions. You've earned it." I stared at him across the conference table we'd converted from an old door and some sawhorses. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. You're not just an intern anymore, Sarah. You're integral to this company's success." That night at dinner, I could barely contain my excitement. A partnership offer, equity in a growing company, real recognition for my work. I waited for a lull in Emma's story about her college applications before speaking up. "I got offered a partnership at the company where I work," I announced, my voice shaking slightly with nervous energy. The table fell silent for a moment. Dad looked confused, as if he'd forgotten I had a job at all. "A partnership?" Mom asked. "Honey, you're still in high school. That doesn't sound very realistic." "It is realistic," I insisted. "I've been working there for months. I designed the user interface for our biggest client. Marcus says I have natural business instincts." Emma laughed, not maliciously, but with that dismissive tone she used when she thought I was being silly. "Sarah, you're 17. Nobody gives partnerships to teenagers." Dad nodded in agreement. "Emma's right. You're probably misunderstanding what they mean. Maybe they're offering you a summer job or something." I felt the familiar deflation, that sinking feeling that came whenever I tried to share good news with my family. "No, I'm not misunderstanding. It's a real partnership offer." "Well," Mom said, clearly trying to change the subject, "Emma got accepted to 3 more universities this week. Tell them about Northwestern, sweetie." And just like that, my partnership offer was forgotten in favor of Emma's college acceptances. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was celebrating getting into Northwestern while I was being dismissed for pursuing something even bigger. After dinner, I called Marcus from my room. "I accept your partnership offer," I said without preamble. "That's fantastic," he replied. "We'll need to formalize everything legally, but I'm thrilled to have you as a full partner. This company is going places, Sarah, and you're a big reason why." Hanging up the phone, I felt a sense of determination crystallizing in my chest. If my family couldn't see my potential, I'd prove it in ways they couldn't ignore. The spring of my senior year brought a series of events that would reshape everything. Emma had chosen Northwestern for college, the same school that had offered me a full scholarship. She'd be studying communications, planning to go into marketing or public relations, fields that seemed to suit her outgoing personality. Meanwhile, Next Gen Solutions was growing rapidly. Our restaurant client had been so pleased with my app design that they'd referred us to 2 other chains. Marcus and I were working 12-hour days, handling more projects than we'd ever imagined possible. "We need to hire more developers," I told Marcus during one of our planning meetings. "I can't keep managing all these user interfaces while also handling client communications." "I know," he agreed, reviewing our project timeline on his laptop. "But good developers are expensive, and cash flow is still tight." That's when I had my idea. What if we brought on interns, high school students like I was, train them up, give them real experience, pay them part-time wages for full-time value? Marcus looked up from his computer. "That's brilliant. You could manage the internship program, train them in your methodologies. We get affordable talent, they get incredible experience." Within a month, we had 5 high school interns working at Next Gen Solutions. I found myself in the unexpected role of mentor and manager, teaching other students the skills I'd learned through trial and error. Watching them grow and succeed gave me a satisfaction I'd never experienced before. At home, graduation preparations dominated every conversation. Emma would be graduating from high school a year ahead of schedule and starting Northwestern in the fall. My parents were planning a graduation party for her, inviting extended family and friends to celebrate their successful daughter. "What about Sarah?" my grandmother asked during one family dinner, gesturing toward me with her coffee cup. "Isn't she graduating too?" "Oh, of course," Mom replied quickly. "Sarah's graduating is wonderful too. We're very proud of both girls." But the party planning told a different story. Emma's graduation celebration would be held in our backyard, with catering and decorations. Mine would be acknowledged with a cake from the grocery store bakery. The disparity didn't surprise me anymore, but it did strengthen my resolve. I spent graduation night not at any party, but at the office, working on a presentation for a potential investor Marcus had scheduled for the following week. "This could change everything," Marcus had explained. "If we can secure this funding, we could expand nationally, maybe even internationally. Your app designs are the centerpiece of our pitch." The investor meeting took place in a downtown Chicago high-rise, in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I sat at a polished table across from 3 executives in expensive suits, my laptop open to present the user interface portfolio I'd developed over the past year. "These designs are remarkably sophisticated," said Jennifer Walsh, the lead investor. "Who's your head of user experience?" Marcus gestured toward me. "Sarah Martinez. She's been with the company since the beginning and holds 20% ownership." All 3 investors turned to look at me more closely. I could see the moment when they registered my age, the slight surprise in their expressions. "How old are you?" asked David Chen, the technology specialist. 18, I replied honestly. "I started here as an intern during high school." Jennifer leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Walk me through your design philosophy. How do you approach user experience challenges?" For the next hour, I presented case studies, design iterations, and user feedback data. I explained my process for understanding customer needs and translating them into intuitive interfaces. By the end of the presentation, all 3 investors were taking notes. "We'd like to move forward," Jennifer announced. $2 million in Series A funding with the potential for follow-up rounds based on growth metrics. Walking out of that building, I felt like I was floating. $2 million in investment, largely based on work I'd done as a teenager. Marcus was ecstatic, talking about office expansion and hiring plans. "You know what this means?" he said, as we stood on the sidewalk outside the building. "We're not just a small startup anymore. We're a real company with real backing." That evening, I sat in my childhood bedroom, looking around at the faded posters and secondhand furniture that had defined my teenage years. In my laptop bag was a contract that would make me a 20% owner of a $2 million company. Tomorrow, I would tell my family about the investment and my partnership. But as I listened to Emma and Mom discussing college dorm room decorating through the thin wall, I realized something important. I didn't need their validation anymore. The external recognition I'd received from clients, investors, and industry professionals had given me something more valuable than family approval: self-confidence based on actual achievement. The next morning at breakfast, I made my announcement. Next-Gen Solutions secured $2 million in Series A funding yesterday, I said, setting down my orange juice glass with more force than necessary. Dad looked up from his newspaper. That's the company where you work? That's the company where I'm a partner, I corrected. 20% ownership. This time, the silence at the table felt different. Emma stopped scrolling through her phone, and Mom turned away from the stove to look at me directly. $2 million? Mom repeated slowly. Yes. The investors were particularly impressed with my user interface designs. They're calling me a prodigy in user experience. Emma's expression had shifted from dismissive to curious. So what does that mean for you? Like, financially? It means I'm financially secure before I've even started college, I replied. It also means I can afford Northwestern's tuition without any family assistance. The implications hung in the air like morning fog. Emma would be attending Northwestern on their parents' dime, while I could pay my own way with money I'd earned through my own efforts. Dad folded his newspaper deliberately. Sarah, this all sounds very impressive, but you shouldn't count on business ventures. They're risky. You should still focus on getting a practical education. His response was so perfectly predictable that I almost laughed. Even faced with concrete evidence of my success, he still couldn't acknowledge that I might have chosen a path that actually suited me better than the one they'd mapped out. You're right, Dad, I said, finishing my orange juice. Business is risky. That's why I'm also starting a second company. This was news to everyone, including me. The idea had just formed in my head, but as I said it aloud, I realized it was exactly what I wanted to do. A second company? Emma asked. A consultancy focused on helping small businesses develop better technology solutions. There's a huge market for it, and I already have the expertise and connections. Mom sat down at the table, her expression somewhere between bewildered and impressed. Honey, are you sure you're not taking on too much? You're still so young. I'm the same age Emma was when you bought her a car and sent her off to college, I pointed out. The only difference is that instead of asking for things, I'm building them. That afternoon, I took the bus downtown one last time as an intern. Starting Monday, I would be commuting to my own office space in a building Marcus and I had leased with part of our investment funding. The bus route that had once symbolized my family's low expectations now felt like a bridge between my old life and my new one. As the downtown skyline grew larger through the windows, I thought about all the times I'd made this journey, carrying homework and dreams that no one at home seemed to notice. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Can we talk when you get home? I want to understand more about what you're doing. For the first time in our lives, my sister was asking me to explain something to her, rather than the other way around. The shift felt seismic, like the first crack in a dam that had held back years of accumulated resentment. That evening, Emma knocked on my bedroom door, something she rarely did unless she needed to borrow something. Come in, I said, closing my laptop where I'd been drafting a business plan for my consultancy. She sat on the edge of my bed, looking unusually uncertain. I've been thinking about what you said at breakfast, about the companies and the money and everything. I waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. I guess I never really paid attention to what you were doing, she continued. I always assumed you were just doing homework or whatever. I didn't realize you were building actual businesses. Most people didn't realize it, I replied, not unkindly. I kept it pretty quiet. Emma picked at the comforter, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Do you think I could learn to do what you do? The programming and the business stuff? The question surprised me. Emma had never shown any interest in technology or entrepreneurship. Her strengths had always been social, interpersonal. Why would you want to? I asked genuinely. Because what you're doing seems real, she said, looking up at me for the first time since entering the room. Like, You're actually building something that matters. My college plans feel kind of empty compared to that. We talked for 2 hours that night. The longest conversation Emma and I had ever had that didn't revolve around some family drama or logistical coordination. I explained my work, my business philosophy, and my plans for expansion. She asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in understanding not just what I did, but why I did it. I think I've been coasting, she admitted as she got up to leave. Everyone's always told me I was special, so I never felt like I had to prove it. But you actually are special, and you prove it every day. After she left, I sat in my room feeling a strange mix of validation and sadness. Validation, because my sister finally recognized my achievements, but sadness because it had taken so long and because our parents still seemed oblivious to the shift happening right under their noses. The summer passed in a blur of business development, client meetings, and strategic planning. Next-Gen Solutions moved into our new office space, a sleek suite in the Loop with conference rooms and dedicated workstations for our expanding team. My consultancy, which I named Catalyst Tech Solutions, began taking on its first clients. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Emma was preparing for college by shopping for dorm room accessories, I was preparing for college by hiring my first full-time employees and establishing corporate partnerships. In August, 2 weeks before both Emma and I were scheduled to start at Northwestern, I made a decision that would forever change my family's perception of me. I called a family meeting. We gathered in the living room on a humid Sunday evening, the same room where my parents had announced Emma's car purchase a year earlier. This time, I was the one with news to share. I've decided not to go to Northwestern this fall, I announced without preamble. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Mom gasped, Dad's face reddened, and Emma looked genuinely shocked. Sarah, you can't be serious, Mom said. You've worked so hard for this opportunity. I have worked hard, I agreed. But not for this opportunity. I've worked hard to build something bigger than what any college could offer me. Dad leaned forward in his recliner, his voice taking on the stern tone he used when he thought I was making a mistake. Young lady, you are not throwing away your education for some business fantasy. It's not a fantasy, Dad, I replied calmly. Next-Gen Solutions is now valued at $12 million. My consultancy has 15 active clients and a 6-month waiting list. I'm generating more revenue than most college graduates will see in their first decade of work. The numbers were real, and I could see them processing the implications. Emma looked between our parents and me, clearly trying to understand how the family dynamics had shifted so dramatically. Besides, I continued, Northwestern will always be there. But the opportunity to grow these companies during this particular market cycle won't wait for me to get a degree in something I already know how to do. Mom was crying now. Not from sadness, but from frustration and confusion. I don't understand how this happened. When did you become so different? I became different when you told me to take the bus while Emma got a car, I said gently. That's when I realized I couldn't count on anyone else to create opportunities for me. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside our windows. Emma spoke first. I think she's right, she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. I've been watching what Sarah's built over the past year, Emma continued. It's incredible. She's already accomplished more than most people do in their entire careers. Why would she put that on hold for college? Dad looked betrayed, as if Emma had switched sides in some war he didn't realize was being fought. Emma, you can't possibly understand the importance of education, he began. I understand the importance of results, she interrupted, something she'd never done before. And Sarah gets results. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the conversation and its aftermath. My parents had eventually accepted my decision, not because they understood it, but because the financial realities were impossible to argue with. Emma's support had surprised me most of all. The next morning, she knocked on my door again. I've been thinking, she said, settling into the chair at my desk. What if I deferred Northwestern for a year and came to work for one of your companies? I looked up from the laptop where I'd been reviewing quarterly projections. Are you serious? Dead serious. I could learn the business side while you handle the technical stuff. We could be partners. The idea intrigued me, but I had to be honest about the challenges. Emma, this isn't like school, where charm and popularity can carry you through. Business is about solving problems and delivering results. It's about working 12-hour days when necessary and making decisions that affect people's livelihoods. I know, she said, and I think I'm ready for that. I think I need that. Looking at my sister, I saw something I'd never seen before. Determination based on genuine motivation rather than external expectations. Maybe she was ready for a different kind of challenge. All right, I said, but you start at the bottom, just like I did. Intern wages, basic responsibilities, and you have to prove yourself every day. Emma smiled, and for the first time in our lives, it felt like we were on the same team. 6 months later, as snow fell outside our new corporate headquarters, I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Next-Gen Solutions and Catalyst Tech Solutions together employed 43 people and served clients in 12 states. Emma had exceeded every expectation I'd set for her. She'd discovered a talent for client relations and project management that complemented my technical skills perfectly. More importantly, she'd learned to find satisfaction in earned success rather than inherited privilege. My parents had gradually come to terms with the path I'd chosen, especially as the financial benefits became impossible to ignore. Dad still occasionally suggested I consider going back to school, but his arguments had lost their conviction. The real transformation had been in how I saw myself. I was no longer the overlooked daughter, the one who rode the bus while others got cars. I was Sarah Martinez, CEO and founder, problem solver and team builder. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Board meeting in 10 minutes. Ready to discuss the expansion proposal? I smiled, straightening my blazer and gathering my presentation materials. 3 years ago, I'd been told to be content with taking the bus. Today, I was about to propose opening offices in 5 new cities. Walking toward the conference room, I passed the photo wall that Emma had created, showing the growth of both companies from our early days in the converted warehouse to our current success. In the center was a picture from our first major client celebration, Marcus and me shaking hands with the restaurant chain executives who'd believed in my vision. But my favorite photo was smaller, tucked in the corner where most people wouldn't notice it. It showed me at 17, sitting at a bus stop with my laptop bag, looking determined despite everything that had happened at home that day. That girl at the bus stop had no idea what she was capable of building. She thought she was being punished with public transportation and low expectations. She didn't realize she was being given the greatest gift possible, the motivation to prove everyone wrong. The conference room was filling up with investors, partners, and senior staff. As I took my place at the head of the table, I thought about how different this room was from our family living room, where decisions had always been made for me rather than by me. Good afternoon, everyone, I began, opening my laptop and connecting to the presentation screen. Today we're going to discuss something that seemed impossible 3 years ago, but now feels inevitable. I clicked to the first slide, a map showing our proposed expansion into 25 new markets over the next 2 years. They told me to take the bus, I said, looking around the room at all the faces focused on my presentation. So I built the company that makes the buses. The room erupted in laughter and applause, but I was already focused on the future, on the next challenge, on the next opportunity to prove that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being underestimated. Outside the conference room windows, the city stretched endlessly in all directions, full of problems waiting to be solved and dreams waiting to be built. I'd learned that success wasn't about getting what others thought you deserved. It was about creating what you knew you were capable of. And I was just getting started.